coming up on the world today. Fighting continues in Ukraine as President Volodymyr Zelensky describes the situation in Donbass as hell. U.S. President Joe Biden arrives in South Korea on the first leg of his first trip to Asia as president. Plus, the sale of hijabs on the rise in Afghanistan following the Taliban's latest rules ordering mandatory face coverings for females. A warm welcome to the program. I'm Amarachi Ubani, and thanks for joining us wherever you are in the world. We begin in Ukraine, where President Volodymyr Zelensky says Russian forces have completely destroyed the eastern Donbass region. He's also accusing Moscow of carrying out senseless bombardments as it intensifies its offensive. President Zelensky says Russian actions in the Donbass region are a deliberate and criminal attempt to kill as many Ukrainians as possible, adding that it constitutes genocide of the Ukrainian people. Since turning away from Ukraine's capital, Russia is using massed artillery and armor to try to capture more territory in the Donbass, comprised of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions, which Moscow claims on behalf of separatists.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on Thursday said Russian forces had completely destroyed the eastern Donbas region and accused Moscow of carrying out senseless bombardment as it intensified its offensive. Zelensky said Russian actions in the Donbas region were a deliberate and criminal attempt to kill as many Ukrainians as possible, adding that it constituted a genocide of the Ukrainian people.
The armed forces of Ukraine continue advancing to liberate the Kharkiv region. But in Donbass, the occupiers are trying to exert even more pressure. It is a hell there, and it is not an exaggeration. The brutal and absolutely senseless bombardment of Severodonetsk. There were 12 killed and dozens wounded in just one day. The bombardment and shelling of other cities. Air and missile strikes by the Russian army. All this is not just fighting during the war. Russian strikes on the Chernihiv region, particularly the terrible attack on Desna. The removal of debris is ongoing there, many killed. Constant strikes on the Odessa region, on the cities of central Ukraine. Donbass is completely destroyed.
Over in Mariupol, the commander of Ukraine's Azov regiment says an order had been issued to stop defending the city and save the lives of soldiers at Azovstal plant, the last bastion of Ukrainian resistance against Russian forces in the besieged city.
Glory to Ukraine. 86 days of Mariupol defense. The military high command has given an order to save lives and the health of the garrison's servicemen and to cease defending the city. Regardless of heavy fighting, perimeter defense, and the absence of supplies, we have constantly emphasized the three most important conditions for us: civilians, wounded, and dead.
As Russia continues its bombardments, Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu said that the Russia and Russia-backed separatists will soon claim full control over the territory of Luhansk region in eastern Ukraine. Shoigu also said that a total of 1,908 combatants have surrendered at the Azovstal steel plant in Mariupol. Although Ukrainian officials say efforts are being made to extract the last Ukrainian defendants still believed to be holed up inside. The Kremlin said that the Azovstal defenders would be treated in line with international norms. Some Russian lawmakers have demanded they be tried for war crimes, and one said they should face the death penalty. In the meantime, 21-year-old Vadim Shishimarin, a Russian soldier on trial in Kyiv for war crimes, has again apologized for killing a 62-year-old civilian. Although his lawyer argued that Shishimarin carried out an order from someone of a higher rank and could not have known whether that order was criminal or not, Vadim, in his closing remarks at court on Friday, said he does not deny what he did and he's ready to be punished and face the consequences. A verdict is expected on Monday. And in search of alternative to Russian gas, Germany turns to Qatar. Both countries have signed a declaration to deepen their energy partnership with a focus on trade in hydrogen and liquefied natural gas. The partnership deal forces regular meetings between authorities from both countries and creates a working group focused on developing trade relations in LNG and hydrogen, as well as one devoted to renewable energy. And as the NATO application roll simmers, Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan has said he will speak to Finland on Saturday, the 21st of May, while maintaining his opposition to Finnish and Swedish NATO membership bids over their history of hosting members of groups of Ankara deemed terrorists. Finland and Sweden formally applied to join NATO on Wednesday, the 18th of May, following Russia's February 24th invasion of Ukraine. Mr. Erdogan said he had discussed the issue with the Dutch Prime Minister and would also speak to Britain on Saturday. He did not specify the people he would speak to in Finland and Britain.
More developments now for Ukraine. We understand finance ministers from the G7 group of nations have agreed a further $9.5 billion on financial aid for Ukraine, bringing the total commitment to almost $20 billion. They just held a meeting and just finished. The ministers said the support would help Ukraine's government to continue to deliver basic services while it remains under Russian attack. Well, Canada has also slapped new sanctions on Russia. The Canadian government says it's imposing additional sanctions on Russian oligarchs and banning the export and import of targeted luxury goods to and from Russia. Those new measures will put restrictions on 14 individuals, including Russian oligarchs, their family members, and close associates of Russian President Vladimir Putin. In the meantime, President Joe Biden is throwing his support behind Sweden and Finland over their bid to join NATO. On Thursday, he welcomed leaders of both countries to the White House, saying both countries have the full, total and complete backing from his country. Sweden and Finland's bids to join NATO come in response to Russia's war on Ukraine, which sparked security concerns across the region. NATO countries have declared their support for Sweden and Finland, except Turkey, which has cited security concerns. Earlier today, Finnish President Sauli Niinisto said his country is open to discussing Turkey's concerns over its accession application to NATO, and that it is also ready to commit to Ankara's security.
President Biden posed the question to his national security team, to his cabinet principals who cover national security, as to whether they supported the accession of Finland and Sweden, and for them to consider the risks as well as the benefits of bringing Finland and Sweden into the alliance. Unanimously, President Biden's national security team emphatically supported the entry of Finland and Sweden into the NATO alliance on the grounds that they have already proven themselves as highly capable security partners. In the parlance, we say net security contributors, meaning they give a heck of a lot more than they take when it comes to a security partnership or an alliance, and that we believe that Russian aggression has only reinforced the argument for the kind of defensive alliance that NATO presents and poses. And finally, we have the principle of the open door. And the open door says that if countries meet the criteria of NATO membership and display that they can be net contributors to the alliance and to overall European security, they should be admitted. That is a principle that President Biden has believed since long before he occupied the Oval Office. And Finland and Sweden are two cases that are pretty clear-cut when it comes to meeting those terms.
The big story across Europe this week relates to NATO membership bid by Sweden and Finland, buoyed by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. However, their membership is now in doubt after NATO member Turkey signaled it would block their attempts to join. To join NATO, all existing members must agree. The DW's Arthur Sullivan joins us now for more on this. Arthur, Finland and Sweden looked to be all set to join the NATO military alliance, but now there's a problem. Turkey is blocking them. Why is that?
Yeah, so it looked all set to be a done deal, really, when Sweden and Finland announced that they were going to try and join NATO, to apply to join, after, years, in Sweden's case, centuries of military neutrality. But this Turkish opposition has come up very suddenly and unexpectedly, and relates mostly to internal Turkish politics, really, in relation to its relationship with Kurdistan. That's the large region, which part of it is in Turkey, part of it's in Syria, Iraq and Iran. Now, for decades, Turkey has been at war with a militant group that's designated widely by the US and the EU as a terrorist group, the PKK. But the issue really that's arisen is that the Turkish President Erdogan is against Sweden's membership, specifically of NATO, because he says that Sweden has excessively close ties with groups affiliated with this PKK. So he feels that Sweden has not done enough to denounce Kurdish militants, specifically those operating in Syria, the Syrian branch, or a group that's closely tied to the PKK. He wants them, the Swedish parliament and the Swedish leader, to denounce these groups. He also wants some people to be extradited from Sweden to Turkey, who he claims are part of terrorist organizations. And Finland has really been sort of thrown in alongside this issue, with mostly because of opposition to the Swedish position on Kurdistan. So that's the official reasoning for Turkey's opposition.
The Turkish president's ties with the Russian President Vladimir Putin, which is pretty unique. Both of these are quite the closest, beg your pardon, to any other NATO leader that Russia is close to. But how much is that a factor in Turkey's move to block Sweden's membership of NATO?
That is certainly true. He is closer than most leaders, and indeed there is rumours still of Putin even visiting Turkey. And we've seen that Turkey have played a prominent role in trying to broker peace talks between Ukraine and Russia. However, I don't think that's a major factor here. Turkey has a history of trying to advance its own domestic causes during disagreements with NATO. And one of the speculations around this is actually less to do with Sweden or Russia and more to do with the United States. So 3 years ago, when Turkey's army crossed into the Syrian border to try and push Kurdish militants back, the United States removed Turkey from its F-35 fighter jet program. Now, this is a very advanced fighter jet, which Turkey, along with other NATO members, was involved in producing and indeed acquiring. But Turkey was kicked out of this program because of the United States' opposition to what it had done in Syria. And there's a lot of speculation that Turkey wants to get back into that program, and that this row over Sweden and Finland joining NATO may be a chance for it to negotiate and find its way back into that fighter jet program at a time, obviously, when the NATO alliance wants to be tight and strong. I think Turkey may see an opportunity there, although that is just speculation.
Indeed, and NATO leaders are saying they will have, their own meetings with the Turkish president to convince him on Sweden's membership. But how much of a blow, Arthur, is this to NATO at a time when the alliance needs to show unity in the face of Russia's war in Ukraine?
It's certainly not ideal. As I said at the start, it was widely expected this would be a fairly straightforward process for Sweden and Finland to join. However, it is a blow because the fact that there's now this delay suggests that there may be a problem ultimately in them joining if Turkey does not drop its opposition. And if you look at their geographical location, Finland and Sweden, they're very large countries. Finland has a huge border with Russia. They're both right there in the centre, more or less, of the Baltic Sea. And if things were to escalate in a wider Russian-NATO conflict, indeed, those two countries and those two areas would be pivotably important because of the Baltic Sea area. So certainly NATO would probably like to have them in there as soon as possible. But I would caution that Turkey has had disagreements with NATO before, and in the end there's always been a way found. So if Sweden would accede to some of Erdogan's demands, it may well pave the way for them to be able to join NATO, but it's still a little bit early to say. And if we look at the most recent comments from Erdogan yesterday, on Thursday, he said that delegations from Sweden and Finland may not even bother visiting Ankara to try and convince him otherwise. That's how opposed he was. So let's see, a long way to go before Sweden or Finland are members of NATO.
Thanks again, Arthur, for breaking it down for us. And just for our viewers here in Nigeria, I have breaking news. The Lagos High Court has sentenced to death by hanging a Danish man, Peter Nielsen, accused of killing his Nigerian wife, Zainab, and his 3.5-year-old daughter. A judgment was delivered by Justice Bolanle Okikiolu Igile. The Lagos State government had arraigned the defendant, Peter Nielsen, before the court on a 2-count charge of murder contrary to Section 223 of the Criminal Laws of Lagos 2015. A state submitted submitted that the defendant, aged 53, killed his Nigerian wife, that's Zainab, a musician also known as Alize, and her daughter on April 5th, 2018, at their Banana Island residence. Nielsen was first arraigned on June 13, 2018. He pleaded not guilty to the two-count charges of murder, which is punishable under Section 223 of the Criminal Law of Lagos State 2015. Again, a Lagos High Court has sentenced to death by hanging a Danish man, Peter Nielsen, accused of killing his Nigerian wife Zainab and their 3.5-year-old daughter. The judgment was delivered earlier today. Back to the Russian invasion now. A look at the global stock markets. According to the Moscow Exchange, both the dollar and euro fell against the Russian ruble on Thursday. Now, as of 11:52 Moscow time, same day, the dollar-ruble exchange rate fell to 61.95. The first time the dollar against the ruble was down below 62 rubles since January 2020. The Moscow Stock Exchange says the euro was also down 3.28% against the ruble at 1 o'clock. Now, the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has accused Russia of using food as a weapon in Ukraine by holding the food supply hostage for not just millions of Ukrainians, but also millions around the world who rely on Ukrainian exports. Addressing the United Nations Security Council earlier today, Mr. Blinken appealed to Russia to stop blockading Ukrainian ports. A war in Ukraine has caused global prices for grains, cooking oils, food and fuel fertilizer to soar. Russia and Ukraine together account for nearly a third of global wheat supplies. Ukraine is also a major exporter of corn, barley, sunflower oil and rapeseed. All of them found in Ukraine. And now Russia and Belarus, which has been backing Russia throughout this invasion, accounts for more than 40% of global exports of potash, which is a crop nutrient. As for Russia's UN ambassador Vasily Nebenzia, it is absolutely false that Russia is to blame for global food crisis that have been brewing for several years.
The Russian government seems to believe that using food as a weapon will help accomplish what its invasion has not, to break the spirit of the Ukrainian people. Still, Ukrainians are going to great lengths to feed their own people and to feed the world. Farmers in Ukraine continue to risk their lives to produce wheat and other crops. Many have returned to fields that are filled with mines. They wear bulletproof vests and helmets as they harvest. And, as we've heard already powerfully this morning, it's not only Ukrainians who are suffering. As a result of the Russian government's actions, some 20 million tons of grain sit unused in Ukrainian silos as global food supplies dwindle, prices skyrocket, causing more around the world to experience food insecurity. The Russian Federation claims falsely that the international community's sanctions are to blame for worsening the global food crisis. Sanctions aren't blocking Black Sea ports, trapping ships filled with food, and destroying Ukrainian roads and railways. Russia is. Sanctions are not emptying Ukrainian grain silos and stealing Ukrainian farm equipment. Russia is.
We'll have more on the Russian invasion coming up after the break. Plus, Australians preparing to cast their votes on Sunday in the country's federal election. Stay with us. Welcome back to The World Today. And just before we continue, I just want to highlight our breaking news this hour. A Lagos High Court today sentenced to death by hanging a Danish man, Peter Nielsen, accused of killing his Nigerian wife, Zainab, and his 3.5-year-old daughter. A judgment was delivered by Justice Bolanle Okikioluigile. A Lagos state government had arraigned the defendant, Peter Nielsen, before the court on a two-count charge of murder, contrary to Section 223 of the Criminal Laws of Lagos, 2015. The state submitted that the defendant, aged 53, killed his Nigerian wife, Zainab, a musician also known as Alize, and his daughter on April 5th, 2018, at their Banana Island residence. Nielsen was first arraigned on June 13, 2018. He had pleaded not guilty to the two counts of murder, which is punishable under Section 223 of the Criminal Law of Lagos State, 2015. Now, interestingly, the situation in Ukraine continues to draw international attention. We have joining us now international affairs analyst River Levinston in Virginia. River, thank you for joining me on the program today.
It's a great privilege. Thanks for being flexible and having me.
The U.S. President Joe Biden has thrown his support behind leaders of Sweden and Finland. I mean, both leaders were at the White House yesterday. He, as well as other Western allies, also have they all threw their weight behind Ukraine before the war, as it sought NATO membership. And Russia invaded Ukraine. How is the support for Sweden and Finland different?
The support for Sweden and Finland is different because historically these countries have been non-aligned. They chose not to join NATO. They've been safe space. They've been the buffer between NATO and Russia. And now there's full support behind them. It changes the post-Cold War definition of power and balance of power. And so therefore it's very different.
Do you think, River, that there has been enough diplomatic effort to end this war? We've seen a lot of leaders around the world visit the Ukrainian president, but very few visits to the Russian president, except, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who on his four-nation tour stopped by in Russia, spoke with the Russian president, got assurances about Mariupol and so on. Do you think that there's been enough diplomatic efforts to end this war and address the issues that exist between Ukraine and Russia?
I don't know what's going on behind the scenes, but I feel given the cost of war, not only to the Ukrainian people, but what's happening globally. And I just pulled some statistics this morning. I mean, we're now in a situation where 23 million people around the world, because of what's happening in Russia and happening in Ukraine, are under a threat of starvation or at a minimum malnutrition. So the cost of war is impacting the people who are being felt, but also around the world. And so I wonder, it's a great question, what we're doing to calculate these costs and to put this in context of getting the sides together. So I guess, again, I'd say, I don't know what's happening behind the scenes, but if you ask me right now, I think more needs to be done. I'm sure you feel the same way.
The whole world feels the same way, but the problem now is getting Russia on to the negotiating table. And of course, to end this war, that's the main focus. The Ukrainian president said earlier today, Donbass is hell. We are just watching the country fall apart in bits and pieces. Mariupol has fallen, and now the Ukrainian president says all the focus now is in the Luhansk region, those separatist territories that are being controlled by Russia presently. Is it time, River, for NATO and the other countries to bypass protocol and to come in and save Ukraine? In the traditional sense, at least.
No, it's a great question. I know where you're going. I don't know what bypass protocol is, but I think what you're getting to, and I get to that in my column as well that I just wrote for The Hill, is that every day, the infrastructure, the ability of Ukraine to be a nation that takes care of himself, it's falling apart. And so, the question, I don't know if it's bypassing protocol, but are there things that can be done to get the sides to the table? Are we looking at a situation where people are so focused now that Russia is and Putin is collapsing that we go and go and go until he cries uncle? Maybe he never will. I think the damage that's inflicted on him as a leader is irreparable, no matter what happens. So what do we do to create the ability to have a conversation now? I mean, I'm hoping that people are looking at that, but again, I'm with you on that point.
So in other words, well, diplomacy is still the answer to ending this war, but Russia isn't backing down. So what other methods can be applied to ending the war in Ukraine?
Yeah, I'm not an expert on that, but I think the parties themselves, the Russians and the Ukrainians, the governments, they need to deal with their fundamental issues together, because at the end of the day, this is a global war, but it's also a conflict between two nations, and those nations have to get together, and we should be encouraging that type of conversation.
Now, I noticed that most of the funds and the aid coming to Ukraine are mainly military. We just read the G7 just pledged $9.3 billion extra for Ukraine. And there just seems to be, a lot of rallying around, providing weapons to fight the Russians and, providing humanitarian aid and so on. When you compare that with the damage that has already taken place in Ukraine, you think it's enough? Or you think that, a lot more needs to be done as we rethink Ukraine's future, knowing that there's still a war going on? So reconstruction and rebuilding really can happen now.
Yeah, I mean, the war obviously has to stand down before the reconstruction can start. So the cost of reconstruction is going to be considerable. And every day it becomes more and more considerable. But we're also looking at an imbalance. Again, we have this war in Ukraine, but what I like to draw people's attentions to is also the consequential damage that's happening as well. I think that, just to give you a sense, so I think in 4 weeks after the war in Ukraine, there was $16 billion raised for Ukraine. It was military assistance, humanitarian assistance. But between then and now, only 93 million has been raised for all of the consequential issues of hunger, of deprivation, of the issues that are happening because of the high cost of commodity prices. So as we look at the cost is just not the rebuilding of Ukraine, but the cost is also consequential across the country. And so it's going to take a lot of effort, and it just points back to the sooner that we can find a way to get Russia to the table, address Russia's fundamental concerns, and making sure that this does not happen again, and protecting the territorial integrity of Ukraine, the sooner we can move forward as a global nation.
River, thanks again for your thoughts and your analysis.
Ooh, thank you so much. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
You too. Back in the United States, U.S. President Joe Biden, is not in the United States. He's actually in South Korea for the first leg of his first trip to Asia as president. He was greeted at the Osan Air Base in Pyeongtaek by South Korean Foreign Minister Park Jin and the commanding general of U.S. forces in Korea, Paul Lacamera, among other American and South Korean officials. President Biden is due to meet with South Korean president, the new president that is, Yoon Suk-yeol, later today at a Samsung Electronics plant ahead of a full day of events on Saturday. The South Korean president hopes to gain assurances from President Biden that the United States will strengthen its deterrence against North Korean threats while expanding the decades-old alliance to tackle other issues. President Biden, in the meantime, is expected to bring a theme of countering China's presence in the region. We'll have more of that conversation a bit later, but staying in the U.S., First Lady Jill Biden has been touted by Ecuador as a progressive country and a light to its neighbors during a visit to the South American country starting Thursday. Mrs. Biden's visit to Ecuador comes as President Guillermo Lasso said he would attend the Summit of the Americas in Los Angeles next month. Lasso's decision has boosted the summit due to be hosted by the United States because a number of Latin American leaders have cast doubt on their attendance. The First Lady toured an early childhood center together with Lasso's wife, Marie Dolud Alciva do Lasso. The pair also visited an elementary school where Ms. Biden met Venezuelan, Ecuadorian and Colombian teenagers who participate in a U.S.-supported accelerated learning program to rejoin the formal school system, according to a release by the White House. It says in total, 63 teens participate in the year-long course held at the Oswaldo Guayasamín Elementary School. About 500 teens throughout Ecuador participate in accelerated learning programs made possible through the U.S.
And in June, Joe and I are excited to invite leaders and their spouses to Los Angeles, California, for the Summit of the Americas. At the summit, our leaders have an ambitious agenda to come together on things like achieving an equitable and sustainable future, building health and pandemic resilience, and strengthening democratic government. But let me say this. The United States stands with you, the people of Ecuador. Believes in education and health, democracy and justice. Together, we vaccinated your people, and we're working on strengthening your healthcare system.
A little diplomatic shuttle there between the President of the United States and his wife, Jill Biden. Back to President Biden's visit to South Korea. The president is there to, of course, counter China's presence in the Indo-Pacific region. His meeting with the South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol today at a Samsung Electronics plant ahead of a full day of events on Saturday. U.S. and International Affairs analyst Calvin Dark joins me now to talk some more about this. Calvin, great to see you. And a little diplomatic shuttle I mentioned earlier, because the president has been in a few meetings as well. And the First Lady, Jill Biden, was also in Ukraine just a few weeks ago. Very interesting that they have been making those trips a lot. But back to the issue, though. This trip is aimed at boosting ties with the U.S. I mean, South Korea's ties with the U.S., but the United States has had pretty good ties with South Korea, right? Do you think that that could change with the emergence of the new president?
Well, I think from Biden and the White House's perspective, I think they're hoping so. Because the one thing that the new president has done, two things I think are key, is one, he's been much more, during his campaign, straightforward on how he supported the alliance with the U.S. More overtly. And also, he wants to take the U.S.-South Korea alliance beyond just military and security, but he really wants to make it multifaceted. And I think that if he can do that as now president, that's what he campaigned on, the White House would welcome that.
Indeed. As some see this trip as a reassurance against China's influence in the Indo-Pacific region, what do you say?
Oh, I think that's clear. And I think that, China has made clear that they see what's going on. I think the complicated thing is going to be that regardless of U.S.-China relations, China is a major or the major trading partner for many of the countries and leaders that Biden is going to be meeting with. So they're only going to go against China or align with the U.S. in what looks like countering China so far, because they have to look at their own economies. And it's not clear that the U.S. would be able to step up and fill that role in the place of China. So they got to play a very delicate game.
Indeed. President Biden is also supposed to convene a summit of the leaders of the Quad grouping. In that group is the U.S., Japan, India, and Australia. This meeting is supposed to take place in Tokyo. For the most part, all of these countries, except India, have been on the same page with the U.S. when it comes to the Russian invasion. How crucial, then, is U.S. relations with India?
They're crucial, but, there's a whole soap opera drama with how the Western powers in the United States have dealt with India over the Ukraine situation, because they've kind of tamped down the rhetoric that, they're not coming out as strong against them, because what the U.S. realizes is that India depends heavily on Russia for its military support, because it has its own border skirmishes with China, and it's in a very unique position because their relationship with Russia goes back a long time. Back to the Cold War when the U.S. was giving military aid to Pakistan. So this isn't something that's going to be changed really quickly. So yes, India is very important, but also India has let the United States know that it has its own interests to look out for. Will Biden be able, though, to counter that with something that would be attractive enough for them to come out more forcefully against Russia on the Ukraine issue? That remains to be seen.
I guess we'll see. Thank you again, Calvin.
Thank you.
East Timorese independence figure and Nobel laureate José Ramos Horta has been inaugurated as the country's fifth president, pledging to dedicate his time in office to strengthen national unity and forge closer relations with China. Ramos Horta, who is one of East Timor's best-known political figures and a man who spent decades as the exiled spokesperson for the East Timorese guerrilla movement during the occupation, first served as president from 2007 to 2012. Thousands of people travelled to watch the inauguration in the capital, Dili, with the 72-year-old sworn in just before midnight in a ceremony replete with fireworks and the sounding of cannons. The inauguration ceremony on Thursday marks 20 years since the restoration of independence in East Timor.
It is our intention to expand bilateral cooperation with China, especially in the areas of sustainable organic agriculture, small industries, trade, new technologies, renewable energy, connectivity, artificial intelligence, urban and rural infrastructure. I have always advocated and continue to advocate that our relations with the Republic of Indonesia, Australia, New Zealand, and the Southeast Asian countries geographically close to Timor-Leste must be at the top of our national agenda. We must explore effective ways of greater economic and commercial integration, of greater cooperation in the areas of defense and security, namely maritime security.
Sri Lanka's locals have bemoaned woes aggravated by a food shortage as the country continues to battle an economic crisis. The country's prime minister has warned of a food shortage as the island nation faces a devastating economic crisis and vowed the government will buy enough fertilizer for the next planting season to boost harvests. A decision in April last year by President Gotabaya Rajapaksa to ban all chemical fertilizers drastically cut crop yields. And although the government has reversed the ban, no substantial imports have yet taken place. Well, many of the residents say that for the children, there's hardly any milk powder. Adults have been affected by the lack of milk powder, fuel, and so many things such as rice. Prices of food have gone up, prices have skyrocketed. Nearly a long queue had formed in front of a shop selling cooking gas cylinders earlier today. Those prices, of course, have risen from 5,000 rupees to 5,000 rupees, beg your pardon, from 2,675 rupees back in April. We have more stories coming up on The World Today Plus. A happy birthday to the Queen as the British Deputy High Commissioner in Lagos plays host to celebrations for Her Royal Majesty's birthday. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're still watching The World Today on Channels Television Lagos. Australians have been preparing to vote in federal elections to decide a new government. It's happening on Sunday. It's become too close to call, however, as the ruling Conservation Coalition has narrowed the gap with the main opposition Labour Party. Economic problems have dominated the last stretch of the campaign, with centre-left Labour putting spiking inflation and slow growth in wages at the forefront of its campaign, while Prime Minister Scott Morrison-led Liberal National Coalition has urged voters to focus on unemployment at its lowest since 1974. Well, voters will be voting across the world, all over the world on Sunday, including in the United States. Today, however, they cast their absentee ballots. They said the government handled the pandemic. With the way the government handled the pandemic was a major factor in their decision.
Yeah, so it's really just like a fundraising effort for local communities at voting stations. So in Australia, a lot of the voting stations are in like elementary schools and things like that. So it's just an opportunity for them to put on, sell a few sausages and make a little bit of money to help the local community. Yeah, that's literally it. It's just, you know, a classic sausage in a simple piece of white bread with a little bit of tomato sauce or ketchup on it.
The turnout's been a little lower than what we experienced in 2019, and I think that's because there aren't as many Australians here as tourists. Some Australians who have been living here may have moved elsewhere in the US because of COVID and working remotely, and then some Australians who are living here have gone back to Australia permanently because of COVID.
I won't disclose who I voted for, but obviously for me one of the decisions about making my decision was evaluating who actually is looking at the holistic approach to Australians, not just those there in Australia. Had many debates in the last couple of years about did they do the right thing by shutting the borders. You know, people like me were stranded, didn't see family for 2 years, so that's always a bit hard.
Well, Australians could have a health crisis on their hands, as authorities today said they had identified a confirmed case of monkeypox infection in a traveller who had recently returned from the United Kingdom, with another probable case still undergoing testing. A man in his 30s developed a mild illness before returning to Melbourne, Victoria, where he was diagnosed with monkeypox and is currently in isolation in hospital. Another man in his 40s developed a mild illness several days after arriving back in Sydney, with symptoms clinically compatible with monkeypox, according to the State Health Department in South Wales. The man and a household contact are also isolating at home. Cases of monkeypox have been identified in several non-endemic countries in recent weeks, including in Europe and in the United States. Monkeypox, which mostly occurs in the west and central of Africa, is a rare virus similar to human smallpox, though milder. It was first recorded in the Democratic Republic of Congo in the 1970s. Cases in West Africa have increased in the last decade, according to medics.
Monkeypox diagnosed in Victoria. So we have a gentleman aged in his 30s who's been positively confirmed overnight. It is a very rare virus to find outside West Africa, but what we've seen in the last couple of weeks is that more cases have occurred than has been the case historically for a long, long time. That may be a combination of changes to the virus. It may be the fact that we are now further and further away from when we all got vaccinated for smallpox.
We now have a very likely case to be confirmed in the next day or so of monkey virus. Monkey virus is not a brand new virus that's circulating here, but it is the first time it's come to Australia. Monkey virus was first found in monkeys in 1958 and first found in humans in 1970.
Let's check in on North Korea now as at 9:30 a.m. every day this week. A soft-spoken official has been giving updates to people in the country on the number of people with fever and new deaths, and also explaining measures by the government to stop the country's first confirmed COVID-19 outbreak. The little-known official, Ryu Yong-chol, has become the public face of the isolated country's battle against the endemic. The equivalent of the U.S. COVID-19 SAR, Dr. Anthony Fauci, or the director of South Korea's disease prevention agency, Jong Eun-kyung. Since confirming its first outbreak and declaring a state of emergency last week, North Korea has changed tack. Appearing to take a page from playbooks of many other countries, it's releasing detailed data about the spread of the virus and advice on how to avoid it. Mr. Yu works for the State Emergency Epidemic Prevention Headquarters, according to the state-run television KRT, which appears to be newly set up to tackle COVID-19. Like its South Korean equivalent, the North Korean agency holds daily briefings now, chaired by Ryu, though without questions from reporters. North Korea has reported 2,241,610 people with fever and 65 deaths among its 25 million population. According to the news agency, it lacks testing capacity and has not specified how many of those people have been confirmed to have contracted COVID. The new North Korean media strategy of apparent openness on COVID is in line with a push by leader Kim Jong-un to build a normal state by improving transparency and acknowledging defects, according to a professor at the University of North Korean Studies in Seoul, Yang Moon-jin. As foreign powers rush to condemn the Taliban's latest rules ordering mandatory face coverings for females, sales of the hijab in Kabul are picking up as women in Afghanistan grapple with how the new order would be practically enforced, with some of them joining protests and others describing their opposition. The Taliban, who swept back to power as the government collapsed last week, ordered women to cover their faces in public, a return to their past hardline rule, and an escalation of restrictions on girls and women that are causing anger at home and abroad. The consequences of disobedience are aimed at a woman's closest male family member, ranging from a warning to imprisonment. In Kabul, one of the more liberal areas of Afghanistan, many women have not covered their faces in recent years. There are indications that some are trying to push back as the prices of head coverings and hijabs are on the rise due to the increased demand right now. Happy birthday, Her Royal Majesty. 8 towns from the capital of the Falkland Islands is to have been given city status to mark the Platinum Jubilee of Queen Elizabeth II. Colchester, Doncaster and Milton Keynes in England, Bangor in Northern Ireland and Wrexham in Wales have also won the honour, according to the Cabinet Office. Stanley in the Falklands is the first UK overseas territory to declare a city, and Douglas on the Crown dependency of the Isle of Man has also received that raised status. Lagos. Nigerians in the state also got a chance to celebrate the Queen's Platinum Jubilee at the residence of the British Deputy High Commissioner. Among guests who joined one of Nigeria's biggest trading partners were government officials, the diplomatic corps, entertainers and Britons living in Lagos, as well as friends of Britain. The Deputy High Commissioner, Ben Llewellyn-Jones, said it was an honour to mark the momentous occasion, which highlights the unique partnership and relationship between the UK and Nigeria.
This evening, I would like to introduce to our Deputy High Commissioner and his wife and the welcome. It's a real pleasure and honour to have you. Yes, indeed. How long have had this? She's doing a great job since I came in, and Abby was
So it's brilliant to be able to host a Queen's birthday party, Queen's Jubilee birthday party. 96 years old, so many years of service, and just a celebration really, not just of her life and her service, but of the relationship between the UK and Nigeria. And we're just really, really pleased and proud to be able to invite guests and have that celebration. Well, obviously it's a Jubilee year, but I think what's really important with the Queen is it's the years of service. I mean, I think people look back on what she's done, what she continues to do, to be honest, not just as the UK's senior diplomat, but as a representative of the Commonwealth, of the realms of the Commonwealth. And what I think she brings to all of that is dignity, professionalism, service, and a real commitment to the relationship between the UK and all of the countries in the Commonwealth, particularly Nigeria. So when you go inside, you can see pictures of her visits to Nigeria, her relationship with Nigeria, and I think it's a real celebration of her and her relationship with Nigeria. Well, obviously, the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting is soon in Rwanda, but really across the Commonwealth, this celebration is being held, and I think Commonwealth and the Queen have such a long and long-standing relationship, and her commitment to the Commonwealth is so well understood and so well articulated. I think really for all of those countries and for us here in Nigeria, it's just a celebration of that.
And happy birthday to the Queen. Just before we go, a reminder of our breaking news this hour. A Lagos High Court has sentenced to death by hanging a Danish man, Peter Nielsen, accused of killing his Nigerian wife, Zainab, and his 3.5-year-old daughter. A judgment was delivered by Justice Bolanle Okikiolu-Igile The Lagos State government had arraigned the defendant, Peter Nielsen, before the court on a 2-count charge of murder, contrary to Section 223 of the Criminal Laws of Lagos 2015. The state submitted that the defendant, aged 53, killed his Nigerian wife, Zainab, a musician, also known as Alize, and his daughter on April 5, 2018, at their Banana Island residence. Nielsen was first arraigned on June 13, 2018. He pleaded not guilty to the 2 counts of murder, which is punishable under Section 223 of the Criminal Law of Lagos State 2015. That's the world today. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani. I'll see you again later.